This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and get practical advice from industry experts about personal finance and living debt-free. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
I've got a first-time guest here on the podcast. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to dispense with a long introduction and get right to it. Who are you?
Well, thanks, Doug. Great to be here in the studio. Gordon Stein. I wrote a book called Cashflow Cookbook and generated a lot of interest in Canadians on how to improve their finances.
Cashflow Cookbook. So how did you come up with this idea? And maybe give us a bit of your kind of backstory to what gave rise to all of this.
Yeah, so my backstory, engineering degree and MBA, and a career in the high-tech industry, leading lots of large sales teams. And a subject that came up a lot was, hey, can you help me with my personal finances? How do you make ends meet? How do you generate wealth? So I've always had an interest in personal finance. And interesting, Doug, the genesis of the book was I was in my car and with a friend, and he plucked a car wash receipt out of my console of the car and said, why would you spend $13 on a car wash? And I thought, it's a car wash, not a big deal. So he talked about, getting an SO Extra card and saving the points and filling in a form and getting a car wash. It was just too much work to do, so I didn't see that as a great idea. Then someone had talked about getting one of their little Speed Pass payment dongles, and I thought, that's interesting. I can get the points, easier to pay for the gas, and save $25 a month or so on car washes. And obviously not a big thing, but it was just so easy, no sacrifice. Got one for my wife, $50 a month. Then I heard the discount home alarm monitoring people on the radio, and I thought, that's interesting, because that'd be $25 a month cheaper. So there was $75, and then my engineering and business curiosity got the better of me, and I started to build this spreadsheet of what are the rest of these ideas? How do you generate wealth? How do you save money to either pay down debt or put away for savings on things that require minimal sacrifice, minimal effort? Are there more of them? And so that was a 2-year journey of building this massive spreadsheet of all of these ideas. And that's how we got started with Cashflow Cookbook.
And I've actually seen the spreadsheet. It's on the laptop here in our office in Toronto. So it actually does exist. Explain to me what Cashflow Cookbook then means.
Well, I wrestled initially. I was going to write it as a novel. And I had all the characters developed, and I had a free weekend cleared, and the family was away. I thought, I'm going to sit down and write this as a novel. And what I realized was there were so many ideas in Cashflow Cookbook, and how do you put these into a novel? It just didn't fit, and left the keyboard a little frustrated. And I just said under my breath, this thing's more like a cookbook. And the beauty of a cookbook is you don't have to start at the beginning and read the entire book. You don't have to go through the drudgery of a plot line and learn about the characters. You can go right to a section that's of interest to you. So you're concerned about car expenses. You're concerned about household expenses. Is there a better way to handle lifestyle kinds of expenses? You can find a recipe, which is the book code for one of these financial ideas. And each one takes you through, hey, how much could you save a month if you're a young millennial starting out? How much could you save a month if you're someone of our age who's got, spouse and kids and cell phones and perhaps a cottage?
30 years old. I'm 30 years old, if anyone's wondering how old I am. There you go. Yeah. So you're going from, people who are younger to people who are older. It appeals to everybody. How many recipes are in the cookbook?
So I originally started out with about 120 ideas, and I winnowed down the best 60 of them, 10 in each of those areas that we talked about, food and drink and household and so on. So there's 60 in the book, and then each book, each section of the book, each recipe starts with a little vignette where I do some character development, and they uncover an interesting one-time saving idea. So each of the main recipes are about a recurring monthly savings idea, and then there's almost a bonus incremental one at the start of each recipe. So
it's kind of like there's 120 of them.
There's 120
if you want to look
really
at it that way.
Ideas.
Now, I have not read the book. It is sitting on the desk here, and I will do that. But, of course, probably most people listening haven't read the book either. Right. So I understand about personal finance books. I mean, I've read them all, and I actually wrote one, and I'll plug it at the end of the show. And a typical theme in personal finance books is, well, you got to make a sacrifice. You have to give up your coffee or your latte, which is what we call coffees now. I don't understand what a latte is, but I think it's a kind of coffee or something. Yep. It's an expensive kind of coffee. You have to give up your latte, and that's how you will get rich. That's the secret to everything. So Is that kind of what you're talking about in your book? It's a list of 60 or 120 things you have to give up, and that's how you're going to be successful?
Well, it's interesting. Most personal finance books, they're talking about this very conventional wisdom. You need to save 10%. You need to invest it. You need to pay off the bad debts and, to encourage some good debts and buy a house. And there's a whole set of dogma, and it gets repeated many, many times in lots of these books. And one of the themes, I totally agree, is all about sacrifice. And so the whole point of Cashflow Cookbook is I said, hey, what are the things that you can shift and change? They're easy to implement. You can do them typically in an hour or less each. And things that drive material amounts of savings. And the key is things that really require little to no sacrifice, just a different way of thinking or an awareness of a better way of doing things.
Which is kind of your car wash example.
Exactly like that.
That instead of paying for a car wash, well, if I've got the card that gives me the points and I get the car washes for free, then I'm not giving up the car wash. I'm just paying for it in a different way, kind of a thing.
Yep.
And by the way, if Esso is listening, they can sponsor this podcast because we just gave them a free plug. But I assume, other car gas places have the same kind of deal. Yep. So what you're saying is look for something that you're already doing and can perhaps be getting it for a lower price. Now, I flipped through the book, and because there's a table of contents where it's all listed, and so I flipped through to page 64. And in this, and I'm not going to give the whole book away, or I'm not even going to give this whole thing away because people should get the book, but you're talking about storage lockers. And so this is something that I see with my clients relatively frequently. Mm-hmm. Things are going pretty good. I've got a house, I've got a big apartment, I got a lot of stuff, and then things are not going so well, so I have to downsize. I have to sell my house, move to a smaller apartment, but I've got all my stuff. Maybe I go through a separation or a divorce, so that's the reason I'm downsizing. I've got all this stuff. What do? Well, I put it in storage. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing that as a temporary thing, my clients tell me, because, I'll be back on my feet and be able to then I'll need all this stuff. Now, I haven't read the chapter, so I don't know what the answer is, but tell me then about your thoughts on storage. I mean, is it as simple as, well, don't put anything in storage, or is it more nuanced than that?
Well, I find when you drive around in any city, you see this proliferation now of storage lockers, and they're nicer and nicer, and more of them coming up all the time, which says that people are making money on the storage lockers. If you've ever tried to liquidate a house full of things, perhaps you've had a parent pass away, or whatever, you need to move to a different city, it's remarkable how little you can get for any of this stuff. So many people will have to downsize following a divorce, or the kids who moved out, and the surplus gear goes into a storage locker of course, because you're emotionally connected to this gear. But if you had to sell it, you probably could get next to nothing for it, first of all. And second of all, if it didn't work in your old house, it's probably not going to work in the new house either. And so people will be paying monthly storage fees of $400 a month for a storage locker, and with things that maybe there isn't even $400 worth in the locker. So it's worth taking a look at it. In Cashflow Cookbook, what we do is we take a look at, hey, what's the future value of making all these payments? So if you're carrying one of these, medium-sized lockers out for 20 years, that'd be $250,000 that you'd be spending on the storage locker. That could be money that you could use to be paying down debt.
So you're doing the math as $400 a month times 12 months a year times 20 years?
And I'm assuming you take that money and invest it
okay. So
at 7%, or you're going to pay off debt that you would have been paying 7% on.
Gotcha. Okay. So, I mean, I understand you're illustrating a point here. Yeah. No one is going to pay $400 for 20 years or earn exactly 7%.
Right.
Maybe they'd earn, well, if you're paying down debt that's a 19% credit card, you're going to do a lot better than that. If that's you're, right. Putting it in a savings account where you earn half of 1%, it's a different number.
Right on.
But your point is it adds up really quickly. Mm-hmm. That's really the point.
100%. And the beauty of Cashflow Cookbook being in a cookbook format, you don't have a storage locker, no problem. You skip that recipe and you're on to the next thing.
Go on to the next one. So just to wrap up the whole storage locker thing then,
yep.
What exactly are you saying then? That take a really hard look at what the stuff is really worth. And if you've got $1,000 worth of stuff that you could have a garage sale and sell for $1,000, or you could
right.
go to a garage sale and buy the same stuff for $1,000,
right.
then keeping it in a $400 a month storage locker for anything more than 2.5 months,
right.
you're losing money.
you're definitely losing money. So if it's a temporary thing, that's great. If you know that you've moved out of one property and you've got another one lined up in 3 months, absolutely you put it in a storage locker. But a lot of people do the downsides, they do the change, they don't think much of it, they put it in there and they're paying the bills month after month.
Yeah, and your example where, perhaps a parent dies. Okay, well, they're in a rented apartment. We got to give it back to the landlord. We can't take a year to figure out what we're going to do with it. So great, let's put it all in a storage locker. But there it sits for a year,
right,
or 2 or 3 until we figure out what to do. So take a very hard look at it. What's it actually really worth? And if there's 2 or 3 items of high sentimental value, great, bring them along with you, or get a smaller storage locker, or see if your buddy will store it in his basement or something. But don't incur that obligation that goes on forever and ever and ever.
Right.
So, okay, well that makes perfect sense. So again, the book has, and that's kind of one simple example. That's not the cornerstone of the book. Like I said, I flipped to page 64. So there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there. You've also got a blog.
Yes.
And what's the address of your website, your
That's
blog?
cashflowcookbook.com.
So cashflowcookbook.com, all one word. And you had a post in there on budgeting being the problem, and I'm kind of paraphrasing what the concept was there, but explain what you were getting at with that post. What's your view of budgeting? And listeners to this show know I have some very definitive views on budgeting, so I'll either agree with you or trash you after you've. So I'm setting you up here to be slammed if we disagree, but it's the beauty of having my podcast. You see, I can do whatever I want. So tell me your theory of budgeting.
Well, I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with doing some budgeting. I think it's really important to understand how much you're spending and what are you spending it on. I think a lot of people wrestle with the idea of, hey, how do I fit things into a budget? Where it can work against individuals is when they say, okay, I've budgeted X dollars for a monthly car payment. And so with that headspace, you're going to spend to the amount of that monthly car payment. What I'm saying is I think it's good, at least in addition to that, to have a net worth statement, which is very simple. Think of it as a wealth statement. What do you own and what do you owe? And you set that up in a spreadsheet going out in time so you can say, hey, is my net worth, my financial net worth, is it actually increasing over time or is it not increasing over time? So you could be leasing a car for $561 a month. It fit into your budget because you can afford that. But if you look at what's happening in your net worth, the car's a declining asset. It's going to be lowering in value. So could you have done something differently on transportation that would help your net worth? So if you're thinking about what's happening in your net worth, I think it changes your perspective on your finances in a positive way, different than just doing budgeting.
So that's an interesting comment. So you just said, think of, and I've now already forgotten what you said, but it was think of what the effect is on your net worth.
Right.
Okay, and that's not really what we do, is it? We think of what's the effect on my budget.
Right. You think of how it looks in the month, but there could be a world of difference there. So, for example, if you bought, say, a 2-year-old used car for $20,000, you drive that one off the lot, and the day you drive it off the lot, it's still worth $20,000. So if you borrowed $20,000 against that car, your net worth didn't change on that transaction. If you bought a brand new car, you drive it off, it's going to depreciate by 20%. So the payments are going to stay the same. You owe that $40,000 on the new car. But, when you get off the lot, you've lost 20% of it. You're driving a $32,000 car.
So the concept of net worth is a long-term concept.
That's correct.
The concept of my monthly budget is obviously by definition a short-term concept.
Right.
So let's go back to the storage locker example. Well, okay, it cost me, maybe a small one's only $200 a month, a larger one's maybe $400 a month. Okay, in the overall grand scheme of things, that's not that much money. But what you're saying is, well, multiply it out by more than a month or two. Right. Multiply it out by 20 years.
Right.
Okay, and maybe that's a silly example. I'm not going to keep it for 20 years, but okay, multiply it out by 3 or 4. And you're also bringing in the concept of opportunity cost here too.
Absolutely. So if you take something like, we're beating up a lot on storage lockers, lots of different ideas in the book. We can come to some other ones. But in that particular example, let's take that $400 a month that you're spending on the storage locker. Let's sell the gear. If it's only worth $400, maybe it's worth $1,000. Let's sell it. And let's take that $400 a month. And let's say you're carrying high interest credit card debt, and let's start paying that down with that $400 a month. That's a really material difference, particularly if you're paying 22% on the credit card debt. So small change like that, nothing really changed. You didn't even see this gear that was away in a locker, but now you're meaningfully paying down the debt.
Yeah, not only are you getting some cash up front, but you're also saving going forward. So is it fair to say then that you are more focused on better decisions and lifestyle change, sort of good habits, as opposed to tracking numbers?
Yeah, I think, well, in Cashflow Cookbook, at the end of each recipe, there's a light example for perhaps a single person with a car and an apartment, and what I call a hearty example, which would be, married, kids. We talked about that. And it has a tracker on there, so you can say, hey, what would my numbers look like on the storage locker, on clothing, on medications, pharmaceuticals, all the different things that are in the book, entertainment, lifestyle. And what would that be worth to me over 10 and 20 years? And all the math's in there. So then you could say, hey, here's where I'm going to be when I get to retirement, or here's where I'm going to be. I'm going to have more opportunity because I have more options because I'm in a much better financial footing.
So it's a much more long-term view. That's really what you're emphasizing here. So, okay, well, this podcast is called Debt Free in 30. So obviously we talk about debt, and you've already hit on sort of some peripheral things here. But so for someone who is in debt,
right,
and having a tough time managing money, how do you help them rethink their approach to finances? I mean, maybe the other way of asking that question is, what do you think the biggest obstacle is for people when it comes to money?
Well, I think those folks who are in a debt situation, I think, that can be a powerful force in their life. So I think obviously important to get out of debt, get on a firm financial footing, and release all of the pressure and the anxiety that comes with that. But the challenge is always, we talked about earlier, the challenge is always sacrifice. Hey, you don't want to give up things. You want to solve this debt problem, but you've got a lifestyle, you've got things that you enjoy. So the whole point of Cashflow Cookbook for those who are in debt is to say, hey, let's take a look at 60 different areas of your life, and let's look at some do better ideas. Even if you went through the entire book and you found 5 or 6 things that could free up $300, $400, $500, $800, I've had people free up $1,000, $1,200 a month, minimal or no sacrifice, and let's drive that into debt as well. So maybe there's a creditor proposal or something, but in addition to that, can you free up that kind of money to ease that debt burden and then get the finances back on a great
Yeah, and that's certainly a discussion I have with my clients. That, okay, so my typical client would have a significant amount of debt. That's why they're coming to see me. It's not like they owe a couple of $1,000 and, okay, well, give up coffee for a couple of weeks and you can pay it off kind of a thing.
Yep.
It's my typical client has, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 worth of debt, and it's accumulated over a long period of time. And there's often been life challenges. They've gone through a separation or a divorce. They've lost their job. They've gotten sick and haven't been able to work. They've used credit to survive. So they've got this massive amount of debt. And so in a lot of cases, you're right. Their only choice is to file a consumer proposal. You can only give up so many storage lockers.
Right.
If your shortfall is $2,000 a month, because that's what all your minimum payments are, then giving up your $400 a month storage locker ain't going to do it.
Right.
But once the debts are taken care of, and so it may be that, yes, okay, we have to file a consumer proposal. It's going to cost $200, $300, $400, $500 a month. How do I fund that? Well, one of the answers is taking a look at where you're spending your money now,
right, and
seeing where it can be, eased back. And the examples in this book are applicable. I mean, like you say, everyone isn't going to be applicable to everyone. There may only be 4 or 5 that are perfectly applicable to you. But these are not all examples for rich people. It's not like, well, if you give up your second yacht, then everything will be. I don't know if that's one of the examples. If it isn't,
that's not in there. There's no second.
You can put that in the second edition, maybe. So, what are some examples? And you've already given us, one where we've talked about storage lockers. I guess there won't be a storage locker company sponsoring this podcast, but what are some other examples of things that people, we're not talking rich people, we're talking the average person could do to, implement some of the wisdom here. So there are ways that they can save money.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many across so many different areas, but I'll give you a couple more. In the financial section of the book, one of the ones that's quite interesting is mortgage life insurance. So when people get a mortgage, typically the couple is there, if it's a couple buying the house, and the question is, hey, what happens to your spouse here if you should become disabled, unable to make the payments? We should protect that. The answer is yes. And that leads to a discussion about mortgage life insurance. And that seems like a really logical thing to do, because relative to the mortgage of $2,300 a month or $1,800, whatever it is, paying another $60 or $70 or $80 for mortgage life insurance seems like a really good idea.
Yeah, and the theory being, we're together. If I die, my income isn't there anymore. How are you going to make the mortgage payment? Well, if we have mortgage life insurance, then I assume the concept is that just pays off the mortgage.
Right.
So this is great. We're all sad that I'm dead, but the mortgage is paid off.
Right.
So yes, it sounds like a perfectly logical thing. Obviously, you don't think it's perfectly logical.
Well, it makes total sense. And the premise itself is a great idea. You absolutely want to protect the family from that liability should the principal breadwinner pass away. But what's interesting is you can go and get term life insurance from a life insurance company, and that can be in the neighborhood of a quarter or a fifth of the cost. And what's interesting is when you get it from a life insurance company, you're insuring the full amount, let's say $500,000, and you carry that $500,000 of life coverage for the rest of your life, or as long as you pay the premiums. In case of mortgage life insurance, what you're getting declines as you pay off the mortgage. So the last month, you've got one payment left of $2,000 with mortgage life insurance. You're paying the same $80 you always were, but you're only insuring $2,000.
Gotcha. So when I first buy my house, we're sitting here recording this in Toronto, so I guess the average mortgage is $10 million or whatever it is these days.
Yeah.
But so let's say my mortgage is $500,000. I go and mortgage life insurance is a product that the mortgage place will sell you, the bank.
That's right.
Right? And so this is a way for them to make some extra money. So they say, okay, your mortgage is $500,000. Here's what the premium is on $500,000. It's, I don't know what the number is. You said $60 a month. We're just making up numbers here, and it's always $60 a month then.
Yep.
It's not going to be $58.12 next month because I've started paying down my mortgage. It's
That's right.
60. So 5 years from now, when my mortgage is down to $400,000, I'm still paying the same $60,000.
Right.
And what you're saying is, so go out and get life insurance, and you're talking about term life insurance.
Term life insurance, yes.
And what's the other kind of insurance other than term?
Whole life insurance.
And what's the basic difference?
Well, it's far more complicated. There's an investment component to it. But if what you're really doing is just protecting that.
So term
stream.
life insurance is just like car insurance.
Right.
I pay for it at the end of the year. I pay for it again. If I didn't die or if I didn't crash my car, then the money's gone. But I paid a lot less than if I had built up some kind of investment with it. So with term life insurance, I go to my life insurance agent and I say, I want $500,000 of insurance. And they say, okay, great. We'll get you this policy. It's term insurance, so you can cancel at any time. But the premiums are locked in for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or whatever. So I've always got the $500,000.
That's right. So you've got better protection, and you're paying about a quarter of as much. So back to our idea of how do we pay down some debt. Not unusual, depending on the size of the mortgage and the age and smoking, non-smoking, everything else, but not unusual to be able to save $70, $80, even up to $200 a month by getting this term life insurance in place of the mortgage life insurance, better protection, and now we've got another $100 or maybe even $200 that we can use to repay our debt. And like the rest of Cashflow Cookbook, there was no sacrifice there, not more difficult to do. That's a phone call and another piece of significant savings. One quick idea, probably an hour to implement, and there might be $100 or $200.
So better protection, lower cost, and there's no sacrifice. That's kind of like a no-brainer.
That's the way the whole Cashflow Cookbook is
that's the whole shtick here. It's no brainer. And I guess the reason we get mortgage life insurance from the bank is it's kind of the last thing they throw at you. And you're about to buy your house and sign all the documents, and they say, oh well, you don't want to die and leave your spouse with the debt. Why don't you just sign here and we'll take care of that? And I don't actually think to shop around and look at something different. So
and again, the premise is a great idea. You do want to protect your spouse. You absolutely want to have the coverage, but let's do it in the most efficient way that we can.
Yeah, save some money doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said you had two examples. That was one of a way to save money, and obviously in the book there's well more. So throw us one more.
Yeah, a really interesting one that I discovered. We all like to buy nice clothes, and great to have nice clothes, and let's not make any sacrifices there. But a really interesting stat that comes up time and time again is that we only ever wear 20% of the clothing that we buy. which is quite remarkable. And if you actually go through your closet and when you do the spring clean out to get ready for the annual yard sale, it's always astonishing how much clothing you throw out. And if you take a look at what you're not throwing out, but selling in the yard sale, a lot of it you've never worn. And what will happen is, hey, it was a great deal. It's a little too tight in the waist, or it's a great deal. I never really liked the color, but it's a designer one, so I bought it anyway.
Are you saying I'm fat, Gord? Is that what I'm reading between that? But I hear what you're saying. And it's sat there for a long period of time.
Yeah. And so if you look at that typical clothing budget that people spend, let's say you spend $1,000 a year on clothing. If you're only wearing 20%, which is $200 worth, and then the other $800 is going to go in the yard sale at maybe 5 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. So there's no sacrifice here, but what it is about taking the extra moment to try it on. Does it actually fit? Does it actually look good? Is it a piece that you need? So are you out buying another pair of black shoes when you have 3 pairs of black shoes, but your brown belt is orphaned because you don't have any brown shoes to wear with it? So a little bit smarter thinking on the clothing and very significant savings. In that case, that could be $800 or $1,600 of incremental money. Could go into more clothes. Some of it could go to more clothes, but some of it could go into this debt pay down.
Well, and you're right. When you go to the clothing place and they've got the 2-for-1 sale.
Right.
Okay, well, if I didn't buy the second one, is the first one cheaper?
Right.
Is it really 2-for-1, or is it really 50% off? Can I save money that way? So yep. Okay, I think the 2 themes I hear here are, number 1, think, mm-hmm. and number 2, look at the long-term implications as opposed to just the monthly implications. And, back to your comment on budgeting, yes, I think your thinking aligns with mine, so I don't have to trash you on it. So, okay, so final comment then.
Yeah.
We talked about coffee and lattes before the thing started, and so I have to ask every personal finance guest what their theory is on this. Okay, so what? I got to give up coffee? What's your approach on something basic like that?
Well, I think the first thing to do, and we all love coffee, I think the first thing to do is to take a look at, what does your actual spend look like? And we were chatting earlier, I talked about a coworker that I had, and this particular person, 2 big Starbucks lattes in the morning and can of Coke, bag of chips in the afternoon. And what was remarkable in that case is the company that we're talking about, they actually had a full-blown bean grinding Starbucks machine right there in the office, and she still went out to get 2 more coffees. You do the math on what she was spending, it would be enough to lease a Honda Civic. It's over $300 a month. Wow. On her total spend. So there again, hey, here's money that could have gone into leasing a vehicle, could have gone to debt pay down, and minimal sacrifice because the office already had great coffee. She never even tried it. So some different ideas like that. What are the ones that you could look at? I'll just toss in one more that was really interesting. Most office buildings, a lot of people don't get their parking paid for. And if you have to drive, in a city like Toronto, you're often in a situation you have to drive. Well, where would you park? The obvious answer is you park underneath the address of where your office mm-hmm. is. But if you just took a minute to take a look at, hey, what are the other parking rates around there? There's people who pay the daily rate every day for years. Mm-hmm. There's a website called Best Parking, and enter in your location. It'll show you a map of that area, and it has little price tags of all the different monthly parking all around. So in about a minute or so, you could look at all the alternative parking. Maybe it's 100 yards away from your office. And most of us could use the extra 100-yard stroll in the morning. But that might be another $100 hidden right there. So that's another example of something that we talk about in Cashflow Cookbook.
And which is why I guess you have to look at what you're actually spending, right, to then analyze whether it can be done differently. And your example of parking is good because, again, we're recording this at my office at Yonge and King in downtown Toronto, right. and parking is as expensive as anywhere here, obviously. At our kitchen or office, we park for free. It's not a big deal. But down here, there's no such thing as that. And of course, a lot of people are taking public transit. But you're right. There are some times when you've got no choice. You've got to drive, and you don't think about that. Well, why don't I survey all the buildings around? I mean, here in Toronto, we got the path system. You can walk underground everywhere anyway, so it's not that big a deal. But you got to actually step back and think about it. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's what it is. And it was 2 years of gathering the best of these ideas and consolidating them into Cashflow Cookbook. So, with the value of the book, you can go through, you can start in the index and say, hey, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. Wow, I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting. Like the parking example, the storage locker, the clothing, and there's 120 really in total in the book.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a great place to end it. How can people find both you and the book?
Best way to start is if you go to cashflowcookbook.com. You'll see the blog. There's articles. There's what I call utensils. There's a lot of bad cooking puns through the whole thing, Doug. And you can read the latest blog posts. You can sign up to get them. And of course, you can get Cashflow Cookbook there. Cashflow Cookbook also available in paperback and as a Kindle edition on Amazon.
Excellent. So there you go. You can get it as a paperback or Kindle. Cashflowcookbook.com is where you can find it. Gord, thanks for being here today.
Oh, real pleasure. Thanks so much, Doug.
Thanks for being here. That was Gord Stein, the author of Cashflow Cookbook, $2 million of financial freedom in 60 easy recipes. And again, you can find more at cashflowcookbook.com. Now, Gord, you're on Twitter. How do they find you on Twitter?
On Twitter, you can follow me at CashflowCookBK. There's a limit on how many letters, so it's Cashflow Cook and then BK, an abbreviated book. And also on Facebook, Cashflow Cookbook with the O's in there.
Excellent. Well, as always, you can find show notes and a full transcript at hoyes.com. That's HOYES.com. And I'll include links to everything Gord just mentioned so that you can find Gord and the Cashflow Cookbook, find him on Twitter, find him on Facebook. So, Gord, thanks for being here. To everyone else, thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.